Hello everyone, DM Gashbad here. We've got another round of 500-point Warhammer the Old World games. Why play 500-point games if you're not going to play a lot of them? And this time we're giving the Orcs and Goblins a rest. We're over to the Ogre Kingdoms. 500 points of Ogre Kingdoms doesn't get you a lot. In fact, it's pretty much all I had, especially considering that under 1,000 points I can't bring my Mournfang. To lead the army I took an Ogre Bruiser, Duke Dunderling. I figured with 4 attacks at Weapon Skill 5 and Strength 5, he didn't need a lot of help, but I did want to give him a magic item to help with armor, so I just gave him the cheap Biting Blade. For only 15 points, that gives my Ogre Bruiser an AP of -2, plus an additional point of Armor Bane on top of the point that he comes with naturally. The model does have a shield attached to him, so I did want to give him a shield, but an Iron Fist can't be used with a magic weapon, so I gave him a magic shield, a charmed shield in this case. 5 points, normal shield, gives him a one-time 5-up ward save against a single wound. So that with his heavy armor gives him a 4-up armor save, toughness 5, 4 wounds. Should be a pretty tough customer. To accompany him into battle, I took 6 ordinary ogres with full command. Those are the skull splatterers in the center there. Off to the left we have the bludgeoned path, 3 more ogres, additional hand weapons, full command, and over on the right we have a pack of saber tusks, Selena and Kyle. I put them in skirmish formation, and there you go, 500 points of ogres. Facing off against the ogres, we've got this mess, 500 points of Tomb Kings of Khemri. The leader is a Tomb Prince, and I have to apologize, I just don't remember what this guy came equipped with. There's not a lot of points left in this army to give him anything too fancy. His stats are pretty good to start with. He doesn't need a whole lot, but I just don't remember what in addition he had. The Hierophant is just a level 1 mortuary priest with no upgrades. There are 15 skeleton warriors with full command, 5 skeleton skirmishers with bows, 3 carrion, 2 necropolis knights, and a single skeleton chariot. There are a lot more of his guys than there are of mine, but these are just Tomb Kings of Khemri skeletons. The ogre should be fine. Here's the table all set up and ready to play. We're doing pitched battle again, and I've left the comfort of my own gaming table. I am at my opponent's house. We went for a pretty open field again. We've got a chunk of impossible terrain in the lower left, a forest in the lower right, a hill in the upper right, and some linear obstacles in the upper left. The ogres are set up at the bottom, and I don't see a lot of need for subtlety. The big unit with the ogres and the bruiser in there is set up in the center, the bludgeon path is off to the left, and Selena and Kyle are going scouting over on the right. I initially put Selena and Kyle over there to stay away from the skeleton skirmishers. I don't want them getting shot and running off. The problem is that a lot of the good things that I'd like the Sabertusks to hunt down are now deployed over on the left. And because the Sabertusks are impetuous, I'm a little worried that they're just going to go tearing off into the Necropolis Knights, which isn't going to end real well for them. So yeah, on my opponent's side, the Necropolis Knights are over on the right, the Skeleton Chariot is next to them. In the center is the Skeleton Warriors with the Tomb Prince. The Mortuary Priest is hanging out behind the linear obstacles with the Skeleton Skirmishers, and all the way over on the left are the Carrion. So the ogres finished deploying a good month before the Tomb Kings did, so I do get the +1 to see who gets the first turn, and I win, which is fine. And with all the tactical nuance of a brick, I just send both units of ogres straight forward. My opponent has all the speed, shooting, and maneuverability that you could want. I am just going to barrel straight forward at the units I don't think can get out of the way fast enough, and hopefully ogre toughness will win out in the end. The Sabertusks I swung off to the right. Maybe in future turns they can get a flank charge to support the ogres. Or maybe if they pass enough of their impetuous checks, they can sneak around and try and hunt down that mortuary priest. So turn 1 for the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Prince successfully activates Thy Will Be Done and increases the Skeleton Warrior's movement by 1. The distance is still a little bit long for him to go sailing into those ogre units. So the mortuary priest and the skirmishers shuffle to the left. The Carrion fly out and flank my army. The Skeletons, the Tomb Prince, and the Necropolis Knights all back up a bit. And the Skeleton Chariot has the reserve move rule, so what it's going to do is it's going to move out in its movement phase, it's going to fire off a shot with its bow, and then hopefully it's going to move out of the charge arc of the ogres on the left. Try and get another threat into my flanks. The Mortuary Priest successfully cast Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades, which means that any unit within his command range that's Nehekaran Undead can reroll 1s to hit. That's really just going to affect the Skeleton Skirmishers when they fire their bows. Speaking of which, in the shooting phase, the Skeleton Chariot doesn't manage to put any damage onto the bludgeoned path, but the Skeleton Skirmishers do take off a wound. Unfortunately, the distance for the Skeleton Chariot is just a little bit too far. My opponent must have made some error when calculating how far the thing can go, and with its reserve move, it wasn't able to get out of the charge arc of the bludgeoned path. With nowhere really good to go, the best it can manage is to end up facing my guys over on the left flank. So over to the ogres, and the bludgeon path are super excited. They're given a really easy charge straight into that skeleton chariot. For their part, Duke Dunderling and the Skull Splatterers failed the leadership test that would have allowed them to march, and so only moved 6 inches directly towards the Necropolis Knights and the Skeleton Warriors, in kind of a go big or go home, I dare you to charge me kind of move. The Sabertusks on the right were spared an impetuous test because the Necropolis Knights had moved just behind the hill and so were out of line of sight. It's not going to be that way next round. Selena and Kyle go and crest the top of the hill. They're looking for some bones to bury in the backyard. In the close combat phase, the bludgeon path don't do great. Between their impact hits and their 9 strength 4 attacks, they only put 2 wounds on the chariot. In return, the chariot puts a wound on the musician. Still, with 2 wounds, a banner, and close order, they easily defeat the combat result of the chariot's 1. It crumbles to dust, and the bludgeoned path passes their leadership test to avoid overrunning, and they reform. Don't want to get flank charged by any of the big combat units that I'm looking at. So back over to the Tomb Kings, and my opponent believes the time has come to send the skeletons into my ogres. Unfortunately, the distance is a little far for those skeleton warriors. So again, he's going to use Thy Will Be Done to try and increase their movement. Fortunately, he does pass the leadership test, and I believe he manages to increase the skeletons' movement by 2. Even so, and with a fairly good roll on the charge distance, he's only able to get a couple of skeletons into base-to-base contact with my guys. The Necropolis Knights, however, don't have any problems and go into the center of the Skull Splatterer unit. The Carrion on the left could have flown over the bludgeoned path and joined in that combat, flanking the Skull Splatterers, but instead they go and flank the smaller unit of ogres. I was a little surprised by this because I'm kind of used to Carrion being bad. I don't exactly remember what their stats were in 8th edition, but they're pretty substantial now. I believe my opponent said they can march while they fly. They have a unit strength of 3 because they're classed as monstrous infantry, and they have 3 attacks at weapon skill 3 and strength 4. They're essentially flying ogres. I think it's pretty likely that they're going to kill off the ogre on the left and prevent me from making any return attacks. But with close order and a banner nearby, I think it's reasonably likely that I either only give ground or fall back in good order. I mean, Duke Dunderling is nearby with his leadership of 8. As for the combat with the Skull Splatters, I'm just not that worried about it. I've got my general there, I've got full command, close order. Each of those ogres has 3 wounds at toughness 4 with an armor save. And I'm just not used to Tomb Kings of Khemri being able to punch out a lot of damage. I think I'm going to take some wounds and then I'm going to fight my way out the other side. The only remaining Tomb King units are the Skeleton Skirmishers and the Mortuary Priest. They shuffle back towards the linear obstacles, over to the right. I believe the Mortuary Priest fails to cast Enchanted Blades, so no rerolls to 1 on any of the combats in here, or the Skeleton Skirmishers. The only target that they have is the Sabertusks all the way over on the right, and they fail to do any damage. So over to close combat, and he's going to start with the Carrion fighting the Bludgeoned Path. Sure enough, the Carrion are able to cause the 2 wounds required to my ogre to kill off the musician, and I don't get any strikebacks. So flank and 2 wounds versus my close order and standard, I'm down by 1. So 7 or less to give ground, 8 or less to fall back in good order, and I fail. Instead, the bludgeon path break and are run down by the Carrion, who overrun into the flank of the Skull Splatterers. Well, could have gone better. It does occur to me at this point that we may have done this wrong. What probably should have happened was that the bludgeon path pivoted and then fled, probably through the units that are engaged in combat, possibly taking some wounds as they went. The Carrion then would have been able to pursue, and probably, since I would have been on the other side of this combat, he would have had a choice of either going into my unit's flank, since they fly, or going over them and destroying the bludgeon path, but he probably wouldn't have been able to do both. That's probably another 8th edition holdover. Regardless, I don't think it would have changed the outcome of this battle. So on to the next fight, the real fight, and my bruiser Duke Dunderling issues a challenge, which is accepted by the skeleton champion. The good Duke takes no damage and smashes 3 wounds onto the skeleton champion, which is fine. Hopefully I can get to that Tomb Prince in the next round. making that somewhat more difficult. Between the Necropolis Knights, the Skeleton Warriors, and the Carrion, they do 9 wounds to the Skull Splatterers, killing off all of the front rank and the flank with the exception of the Champion. The Ogre Champion does manage to put a single wound onto the Necropolis Knights, but that doesn't go very far in overcoming the absolutely massive combat result that the Tomb Kings have accumulated. The Ogres lose the combat by 9, and since we only have a unit strength of 12 now, we're outnumbered 2 to 1, meaning that we're gonna break on anything but a double 1. Unsurprisingly, Duke Dunderling's leadership is not enough to keep us in the fight, and we run away. The good news is that the Ogres actually run away pretty far. We go 10 inches, and none of the other units are able to meet that amount. The highest they get is 9. So I think that means that the Ogres get away and we can reform and try this again. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works in the old world anymore. You don't just compare the break and flee to pursuit rolls. Now you actually pivot the Ogres away from the unit that they're running away from, in this case the Skeleton Warriors. You move that distance, and then you do the same thing with the pursuing units. And because the Necropolis Knights were way over on the flank, they were a lot closer to my Ogres than they otherwise would be if I was just running directly away from them. So with their pursuit move of 9 inches, they were able to get in to the Ogres, destroy them, and we call the game there. With only the Saber Tusks left, there's no chance that the Ogre Kingdoms are going to come back from that. I lose. Well, one way or the other, I thought that this was going to be a very fast game. Either I was going to rush forward and beat up anything in front of me, or I was not. Turns out it was the latter, so if I'm going to use these Ogres again, I think I'm going to have to reconsider their tactics. Can't just charge straight forward and expect to smash through whatever you come into contact with anymore. I think between the bonus that charging units get to their initiative and the loss of the step up rule, the Ogres are going to have a lot harder time powering through charging units. So I could try something like using the Saber Tusks as diverters, arranging them in front of my guys and try to intercept people trying to charge into me. I could stagger the units a little bit, keep, say, the Bludgeon Path back a little bit to try and discourage flanking units. Or I might have to do like the Beastman player did, which is invest in more smaller units, even some that are just a single model, or some shooting, like Lead Belchers. Either way probably is a good thing that the game doesn't reward boneheaded tactics like the ones I was employing. I mean, I wanted to do it sounded really fun, but I might have to put a little bit more thought into it next time. Anyway, thanks for watching. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, observations, or concerns, and I will see you on the next one.